Hi. Sorry I've shocked you with the way I've started with a lot of psych. Apologies for the technical difficulties. It happens. So, yes. But, you know, the amazing smart guys have managed to fix it, so we are all good to go. So, my name is Frank Tamre. I come from, I'm going to take you through this interesting story. And essentially, let me just test that it's actually okay. Yes, we have to fix this now. 1 second, sorry. We were just there, almost. Yeah. I think. Hidden the Bluetooth, so I can't say. Yeah, the clicker. It's this one. So this one. So I think you have to put it here. You have to put it here. Okay, now it will work. Now it will work on my machine and also online. So we are all good to go. So my name is Frank Tamre. I build things that is mostly Android stuff and mobile for that matter. I like experimenting a lot. The other bit also is I organize people. So I organize communities and mostly in Africa, that is in Nairobi. And we have like the largest Android developer community in the continent. Kotlin also. And we also do DroidCon, but then DroidCon, Nairobi, Kenya. The other bit of it is I am a lobbyist. I love lobbying, and I love lobbying for developers. And speak to MNCs, that is multinational corporations, and tell them like, hey, this is what developers want, because that's where I usually play at most of the time. And I do this just independently as a single like individual with a bunch of friends. And we love doing this because it's so much fun. Sitting down, giving feedback to products that we use and that we love. Because we love shaping the way developers will actually get to use them. Then I'm also a storyteller. And because I'm a storyteller, I applied for this talk, and I was actually given the permission to come and speak. And the story I'm about to tell you is about all this stuff to do with Android developer communities, but specifically at Kyosk and what we do there. And Kyosk is, that's where I work as an Android team lead, and essentially I'm in charge of like this amazing team of developers, and we build and ship 2 apps now. From 6, we scaled it down to like 2. And what we're based in is we play in the industry where we are the second largest now, I think, fast-moving consumer goods company. And what the fast-moving consumer goods company is we play around from between the manufacturers and the last-mile retailers before they reach the consumers, and we give them the opportunity for them to make orders instead of shutting down their shops and going to order or going to stock these items and bring them. So because of that, we joined the team, and that's what I want to talk about. Like, how are we thinking about, or how are we moving from XML to us using Compose? So the agenda of that thing is that I'll talk about the history, like where we got from, and then after that, we'll cover bits and pieces about like how we lobbied Okweli, which is the design system, migration journey, lessons, and then give an opportunity for Q&A. So first bit is like the history. So you've probably been told this, or you've probably mentioned this every single time you join a new team. And this is usually what every new developer says every single time they join a new company. We need to refactor. And it's such an interesting thing because when you say we need to refactor, the first question every senior engineer who's been there for some time will ask you is, what are we refactoring? Then the next question they'll ask you is, why are we refactoring in the first place? It's working, right? Why should we touch it? The other bit is, after the why, is who is going to do this? Now that you see everyone's tasks are spread out for the next 2 to 3 weeks, or like your sprints are already organized for even up to 2 months, 3 months, who is going to do this work of tech debt or this work of like refactoring? The other bit is how are we going to go about doing it? Because we already have tasks, we already have an app that is in production. How are we thinking about refactoring this piece of code, or how are we thinking about changing our piece of code from where it is to what you want us to get to? And when are we going to do this? Because as you realize in FMCG is if our systems are down for 40 minutes, I'll give you an actual scenario. $2 million is like it finds it, you need to now start thinking about how do we recover this because the systems are down. And if you can answer all of these questions within the FMCG space, you're actually in a very nice position. Because when they say fast, you as the engineers who join these companies need to be really, really fast. So speed is one of the things that you prioritize. And the other big is that change is your best friend. In Africa, it's an interesting problem because consumers in different countries are not the same in terms of like how do they pay for these commodities, what are the things that they want in this that they want us to like ship to them or like give to them. And so you have to think about all these scenarios every other day. And in the company that I work for, we have very aggressive salespeople. And I'll kid you not, it's like sometimes you look at those numbers and you're asking, like, how are we in this other country? I thought you're supposed to hit this in like 3 months' time. And so now those problems that you thought you'll start to solve in 3 months' time have just been brought to your face, and now business requires you to release it ASAP. So mostly it's availability. And so in as much as you're moving so fast, the country that you're already operating on and you're hitting all these crazy amounts of volumes is that you have to think about, okay, how will our Android app still be making all this money? It still does not need to go down at any one point. Then the other thing is that it needs to be scalable. And apart from it being scalable is that it needs to be reliable. Now, when you look and put all these things into context, is that all these things happen in case anything fails. You need to be able to quickly like recover all those sales that you did, or like your system needs to be adaptive. So where I'm starting from this and like putting it in terms of like Compose is in this journey where it started from was after I joined and we had all amazing like new guys join into the team, because the context was we had one engineer and then he left, and then like you joined the team and you're the only developer who needs to support up to 6 applications. And so we were like, okay, how do you go about solving this? First was it was scaled down. And then the lobbying happened was when you go and sit down and ask anyone, it's the question that everyone will ask you. If it's working, why do you want us to change it? We have bugs, we can fix the bugs, and everything will be okay, and we will move on. First person to ask the question is the product manager. Why do you want to change this, Frank? Why do we have to change this? So you have to convince the product manager. And like it was a lot of sessions where I had to explain to her, like, hey, these are the benefits that we're going to get when we move from XML to Compose. We have a new developer team. We think we can do this. We are energetic, and all the stories you can give them. But they're very data-focused, so they're like, no, you need to give us actual reasons, prepare a document, and send it to us. So that was the product manager. The engineering manager was interested in terms of like the changes that you make within the Android team. Is it going to affect the backend team? Is it going to affect the web team also? And so we had to like sit down and also like come up with like a strategy on like talking with the engineering manager on how this was going to happen and how long it was going to last. And then the last person was, the second last person was the CTO. And the CTO is he sits in that bit of like tech, heavily tech. And also he's looking at the business side because he has targets also that he needs to hit. And it was like, okay, you're talking about Compose. I've heard of it. And I think he heard of it when still in like the alpha stage. It was not yet in stable. And so he had all these questions. And for all of these people and the Android developers was an easy pick because all of them come Compose first. So, and it was like, this was the question that I had to answer every single time you get into these meetings. And these meetings lasted, it was up to a 4-month period where you're trying to convince everyone, hey, this is why we should move. And the questions and the answers that I had to give were these ones. The first question was, we already have an existing code base. How is Compose going to affect us? And so the answer to that was, okay, you see, Compose is interoperable. So that means that we have our XML code, and the new features that we're trying to ship out, we can easily change our features and just write everything in Compose in that feature, and everything will work well. I'm like, okay, we have a question. Is Compose production ready? And I was like, yes, it is production ready, by the way, from 2021, and this is 2022, so obviously we have use cases. you send all these videos and you tell them, look at this works, and this is a huge company, so we can do this. The other bit is, so that was a stable. DORA metrics was very important, and what DORA metrics are is, it's mostly in the DevOps world, but in our organization, we've scaled this to everyone, and you're interested in thinking about developer productivity. So anything that you're doing, you have to think about how is this thing going to make, is it going to reduce or to increase the way the developers are actually working? Is it going to take more time for us to ship out features? So I was like, well, productivity-wise, it actually makes sense. And then you do a very quick demo on look, this is text, this is how I would actually implement a whole UI. You see, it's taken me less time. They gave me that leeway. Team skills. You're introducing a new technology to the company. How sure are we that the existing people will be able to do it? Or are you telling us that we need to go to another sprint of hiring people? And I was like, no. The developers in our team, they are already pro-composed. So they're like, okay, that makes sense. And so the next step was now, how do you talk now to the design team? And thank God is that the design team was already thinking about how do we have our own design system. And those meetings were really interesting. Weekly feedback reviews, cycles, on how does this look like. Coming from the Android side, I knew there was already material, so I thought that they already knew that, so I gave them, we can use this material used there. Why don't we modify this? And I was given a look. It was virtual call. I was given a look and told, do you know this is material design? This is just Google's design system. So you want us to use Google's design system? And I was like, I'm sorry. We will definitely now come up with ours. And so in these meetings, that's how we came up with Ukweli. And so what Ukweli is it's a Swahili word for truth. And so we wanted a single point of truth for all our designs, web, mobile, and web and mobile. Sorry, yeah, web and mobile. And we are lucky that for Android, we were the first people to actually now, we're the ones who are doing the first implementation of this. And what it is that this is literally, the designer quotes this and says it all the time. This is the first design system that is for informal retailers. And how he went about doing it, the migration journey was that, implementing it was that we came up with this philosophy, especially once it came from the design side, and now we had to sit down and talk, was that the philosophy is very simple, of how are we going to do our design system or the implementation. And I think these are the lessons that probably anyone who is thinking about coming up with a design system that is based out of Compose can actually think about. The first thing was it had to be abstraction first, in that there are different layers of developers. We have the feature developers, and then you have the platform developers or the infrastructure developers. So what the infrastructure and the feature developers do, you should not give that, in as much as they want to do stuff, abstract a bunch of things from them. So they don't need to think about these things, they don't need to look at these things, they just need to see a very simple way of implementing this. The other bit was we wanted it to be heavily modularized. So we're thinking about our text, we're thinking about the UI implementation that is going to go to the final screens that, let's say, the user is going to use. We need that all those bits are really abstracted such that we can easily reuse these things elsewhere. Then the other bit was it needed to be easy to understand for the developers. That is the existing developers and the new developers who are going to join the team. Easy to say, but complexity comes sometimes when we start over-modularizing things. The other bit was reusability. How do we ensure that this design system that we have created within the Android team can be used to other new applications that we actually bring it out, that we actually start to ship in the future? And then we wanted it to be strict. I am a huge fan of this. I feel like all design systems that we use, especially if it's within the context of a company, needs to be strict. With that, I mean that if someone wants to implement a text and they want to use a header, if they need to modify it, why do they need to text and then they put their fonts and colors, and that starts to change the way everything looks like? So it was if you have to implement a header, use the header, type that we've actually given to you. And then we wanted it to be heavily documented. So everything that we're doing, we have to actually write the documentation for it, because we looked at the problems that we faced when we were joining the organization in terms of understanding the way everything works. And we said we have to ensure that it is heavily documented, both inline documentation within the code base and also externally. There's this nice Jira page or Confluence page that you can go and read and see how everything is playing out, and also on GitHub. So this is what we had thought about, but then it was how do we go about implementing it now? So the implementation philosophy was that we wanted to start off with atoms, and atoms were the most basic things that we would have. And this is type, text, all those things, text, colors. Those are like the foundation of how we start to build on it. And then on top of the atoms, we'd have the utils. Now, it's a very interesting debate where people ask, why do we need utils in the first place? But the utils in this case is, and I'll talk about it later, is like things that are not necessarily like an atom, but are needed by the app for it to work, by a design unit for it to work. For instance, depth, space, things like that. Then you have molecules, which is a combination of utils and atoms. Think of your buttons. Buttons are composed by having color, shape, text, and an icon. Or in some instances, I've seen images. Then you have your screens, which is a combination of both the atoms, the utils, and the molecules. And so once we had that in place, the next phase to go to was, how do we start creating the atoms? What are the atoms we want to have within our app? And so we started off with utils first. So it was really easy. We created, I jokingly say library, loosely say library, but it's just like a Kotlin file that has a list of all the icons. And now we're trying to migrate this to be a whole library that exists on externally. Then it's like space. What are the types of spaces that we have? We have space that is like 2 font, 3, like that, and all those depths. And then we add it there. Then we have the images, which just like links to all the places that we have all the images stored. And this is mostly like externally. Because space for us, the size of the APK for our application is really key. The retailers would easily uninstall your app and refuse to use it because they say it's too big. And they would create time to download videos and all those things. Then you have depth. So we have to like specify and say what are the types of depth that you want to have all through the application, and then use this all through the application, just that whole reusability bit. And so the first part that we started implementing it was type. Type was interesting. I think I really love type, because how we went about doing it is like an example of like a header, as I was saying, is that you'd easily come and compose your header and say like, look, my header is going to be made up of text, is going to be like a variable that someone is going to input, and then we have our text styles put there. Colors are already defined in the other atoms, where we have like the blue, red, green, all those that we have. But then we're very specific in that our blue is not like blue, You can try an example today, look for anyone and ask them, give them different shades of blue. And they'll tell you this is blue, or someone will tell you this is sky blue, baby blue, all those colors. Then the other bit is put the fonts, weight, and then put a modifier. Then the next bit that we went into is, now once you already composed it, when someone is coming to implement like a button or needs to use a text field anywhere, now this is like the feature developer, we'll just come in and just say like header, this is the text that it looks like. They don't need to put color, they don't need to think about that because it's just the same. If we need to create a variation of the same, we need to go back and say like, okay, how are we modifying this? Then there's color. Color was straightforward. We just create like a variable for all of them. Like, hey, this is Kiosk blue. This is how it looks like. List all those things there. And any new time that you want to add color, and in like most organizations, it takes a while before you make large-scale visual changes and the UI changes. Navigation was an interesting one, and I think most of us are aware that it's one of the it divides opinions if you see the way people are going about implementing navigation in their apps. So there were modules, yes, but we wanted to think about this as navigation as a module, in that we did not want to have navigation inside each feature, but we wanted to be like exist separately, create all this logic that exists there, and then the only thing that you come and do is that you create your destinations. This is my file. This is where all the destinations are going to. And then once you create the destinations, obviously for all those navigations that we're thinking about was that there was some element of like state when you move from one screen to another, and how do we carry that forward? Then the last bit was on state. And for state, the debate at first was how do we make this to be more usable all over the app? But then we came back to let this be feature-based. So if you get into a feature, make the state in like that. And then we graduated from there, and then we had molecules, which is made up of either multiple atoms or multiple molecules. And a good example for this is a card. So this is an example of a card that we'd have in our application. And so if you look, it consists of different things. And you have text there, different types of text, and you have a button. So it would have a type, space, buttons, images, icons, and depth. And so that's how we went about like doing it. So we defined the depth elsewhere, and so when you're composing a card, you say, okay, my card will have header card. That's the bold icon, the bold title that you saw. And just go back there, welcome to Kiosk. And then you had your normal text, which is like the card text, or like the body text that is used all over the application. And then you have your icons, which are like moving you forward and backwards. And then you have your button. There you do not need to define like blue, yellow, white. No, you just call it a button, white with icon. So, yes, so that's how you'd go about doing that. And buttons was also the same case. Just define the color, text with icon, and you have different types of buttons in the application. Different kinds of colors. You have a success button, and our success buttons are not green, red, yellow like that. They have a different sort of like color that we adopt. And so we had to like specify all of those things. And so for buttons, again, when you're doing the composition, is you'd have your type, space, and then after your space, you add your colors, and then you have your icons separately, like defining them. And these are like the atoms that were there before, and you just bring them together and define them, and they exist there. And then once we did this, we did a demo of like a screen. And the screen that was brought was like a interesting welcome screen. And so what the screens would have is, we combined this with having all the molecules. So you need a card, we put a card there, and the different instances that you want to have of it, and then the atoms, and then you have the state. Now, yes, it's more or less, and then navigation. The part that became interesting for us is when we started seeing that we were looking at state and state and navigation as parts of the UI, and not something that is separate. Because when we started asking, like, okay, so are we going to put this in the backend? Are we going to have this as something that the UI people are thinking about? And we said, let's put it as UI bit, so that everyone can start to think about it as you're developing it from the first state, from the first instance. Yes, so the various things that I think, if you ask me right now when we sit down and like we're talking about it, we're not like 100% there yet, because there's a lot of like thoughts that we had to put in when we were doing this. And one of the things was the Jetpack Compose roadmap. To be honest, I really love it. It's like my one single source of truth. And this is the reason. If I see some issues that I'm having, and I see like it's part of the roadmap, it's easy for me to say like, okay, yeah, they're going to deal with this, so it's all good. And then I'm on the lookout for what is actually going on within their roadmap. Are they actually planning on dropping this or not? Is this something that we need to like think about either creating from scratch, or do we just say, hey, let's wait for this to be solved 100%? Then modularized approach. You will agree with me that there are all these like two different schools of thought for like modularization. One is you could have one feature, 10 different modules in it. Other people would go and say like, okay, you can have over 1,200 or 1,500 modules inside, that exist inside. And so for us we said, if you're going the modularized approach way, let's modularize it to the foundation. That is in terms of like the atoms that you're thinking about. Are we modularizing our typography? Are we modularizing the way we think about colors? Are we modularizing even the way we think about like spaces in between the whole application? That we can easily reuse these components, move them around within the whole application. Then the tech leadership buying, because these are the people that will actually give you a go-ahead as to whether or not you can do it or not. Even being a team lead is when you realize you're such a small, okay, you're a cogwheel, you're not a small cogwheel, you're a cogwheel within the whole entire breadth of things. Because if they do not see the need of this, then you're not actually going about doing it the right way. And then there's the team. Our team, as I said, they actually joined the organization, or I can say they arrived when they are already pro-composed. So there is no convincing that you need to give them. And then here's the interesting thing, that they do work on different projects, and they share them on Twitter, and they get these likes and retweets. And so when you said you're moving to Compose, everyone has a different way in which they want to do Compose. A good example for this is, how do we display text? Let's say the screen that you can see right now. It's like, how would you want to do, if you wanted to do this in Compose, someone else would be like, just put the icon there. You don't need to like create all those complexities of having a design system. No. And then someone else would be like, no, you need to actually define the sizes and put them separately. Others would be like, let's get very modularized, such that we define the 2 types or 3 types of text that you're going to have here. And so the team was, but the advantage that I think we had was that this team they keep up to date with what is going on within the Android space. And so they're really excited about, hey, why are we not using these latest things in our applications that are already in production? And so that was like an easy way of buying it in. The only complex part was how do you explain to them that there's this way of doing things that is very opinionated, that we want you to actually contribute to it. And then there's the discovery phases, which were very interesting in that, and I think for me, I think it was when I was doing and dealing with the navigation bit, where yes, there are different navigation libraries, but it was like, how do we think about something that even if anything changes externally, we're already good to go, and it can make it easier for us to adopt something that comes in standardized in the future. So those discovery phases were interesting. Some would need a lot of pair programming. But then the question would have been, or is, how do you split the time between things that are being shipped out on a daily basis versus you doing your discovery phases? And it was as easy as during our sprints, we started reallocating time for tech debt, where you'd spend time doing a discovery phase. Yes, you're doing research, but you need to come and say, in your discovery phase, how long is it going to take? What exactly are you looking at? And what's the result of this, you looking at this? Is there like a demo, an Android application that you can play around with, or a very small component that you can actually show the way it looks like? And so this is what I would say was something that, for me, were the lessons that we learned from this whole phase. And thank you. I am done with my story. So this is the time that now I want to give you an opportunity to ask me any questions and answers. Yes.